All right, another request was how to actually do case studies. And I thought this would be a great addition to the finishing touch videos as well. It's a very underrated subject, and the reason for that is because it might not seem that interesting, but case studies are the most important thing that you can do, as well as deep work sessions. So, what we are going to show here is a form of case studies. It is basically also a deep work session where you dive into the chart and you see, all right, how can I actually study this certain topic? So, for example, we talk a lot about fair value gaps in enrollment. So, how do you actually go about studying fair value gaps? Well, I show you exactly how I used to go over studying fair value gaps. Very simply, what you do is this can be any Notion page, right? Can also be something different, can be even a pen and paper. I don't care how you do it, as long as there's some form of studying. That is the most important part. And I want to create case studies on fair value gaps right there. I turn that into a page. And here I'm going to write everything down that comes to mind. And eventually I might add pictures, etc. So I just simply start off on any time frame. And you can again study a particular time frame. If you want to study the monthly, the weekly, the daily, whatever you want to study, then of course you can do that. And I simply go over the fair value gaps. So I mark out fair value gaps right there. I see a fair value gap right there, fair value gap right there. I see a fair value gap right here as well, which we came into actually. And this fair value gap, and of course I've already studied this before, so it might be a little bit different because I already have the knowledge and the experience to see it, but very simply said right there, this fair value gap, well, eventually that does not create a new fair value gap lower. All right, that's quite interesting. So after we go into consolidation, then the first fair value gap being created is a bullish fair value gap right there. Then eventually we continue higher. We respect those bullish fair value gaps, respect again this bullish fair value gap right there. And then eventually, same situation happens where we do not create a new bullish fair value gap, but we do continue higher after sweeping this low. Why does that happen then? Is there a time factor? Is there something on the higher time frame for that? For example, all things we can note down, right? So here, the not how can I write this down the best is the lack of creation of a new FVG does not mean that we are going to reverse immediately. So this is where understanding of different time frames as well comes in. So here, if we now incorporate different time frames, which I already understand, on the monthly we actually came into something as in the breaker on Nasdaq right there and a monthly fair value gap. So I've cheated a little bit. I already knew the situation right there. But that can be told, and the extra confluence that we do want to continue higher right there can now be told by the fair value gaps on the 4-hour actually. So that is another confluence that we have right there. So that is great to actually know. That's a great study. Now, why does it then not happen here? Why do we not reverse right there? Well, first of all, because we are following through on monthly context. All right, so we are following through on monthly context, so we don't really have a reason to stop there. So the next target is actually that target right there. So also, there could be something on the lower time frame actually. We do have daily value gap, but we do not tap into that actually. On the 4-hour, could also be a time factor right there, which we can see actually equities open happens as well. So we sweep that to continue higher. And we continue higher because the higher time frame context is still bullish. All right, let's continue. What happens right there? Same 4-hour, and we again do not continue higher. Here we have some sort of signs potentially continuing lower. Higher time frame is still bullish. What is the daily doing right there? The daily, now the daily is coming into this daily fair value gap right there. So the higher time frame is quite important to understand because we will come into those fair value gaps most likely. All right, then here we have this 4-hour fair value gap sitting right there, which we continue higher off of as well. Eventually, again, same thing happens right there where we stagnate a little bit, and eventually, let's look at the time frames again. We are creating those daily and those weekly time frames, fair value gaps right there. So that could be very interesting because that could lead me to understand on the 4-hour, for example, what happens on the 4-hour, this is an early sign that we want to stop. And what are we stopping for? To potentially make a retracement coming into a higher time frame for value gap to then continue higher. So that is quite interesting right there. That could be all in the form of a case study. Now, if you want to study a certain topic, for example, because I have had this on my mind and I actually want to just create a deep work session on it as well, where I want to study STs a little bit more, sharp turns. And what I would do is I would just simply scout on the market right here and look at STs. I would look at market turning points. What are ugly market turning points? What are beautiful examples of a sharp turn? And what are just mediocre examples of a sharp turn? And I just study them. And I do this in hindsight. That is very important. Nothing I do here for my case studies are in backtesting. I just simply go over the chart and I try to find the concept that we are talking about. And I try to train my mind. Where does the sharp turn happen? Why does it happen right there? Why does this sharp turn hold? Why does the other sharp turn not hold? All those things is how you can actually create a case study. So to go over a few of the STs, what I would like to do, and what I do tend to do as well, is first of all, I go into hindsight right there and I see what happened. Did we have a nice sharp turn before we continued higher? So was there a sign that we could know, did we actually continue higher? Well, first of all, we had this sharp turn, but not the most beautiful sharp turn. And on the 4-hour already, after that, we create a new value gap. Let's look at the 1-hour actually. Was there something on the 1-hour? We had this sharp turn, which actually did not hold. Then we have this sharp turn right there, which is very interesting because there is a difference where this sharp turn and this fair value gap actually, well, mechanically seen, that is a breakaway gap at that moment in time. So is a potential case study that we could create, all right, how do the sharp turns work when they are a breakaway gap instead? Is it then that the ST on the 1-hour, for example, with a weekly PRA, is already strong enough to hold in itself? So let's dive a little bit deeper into this, of course. Now, with backtesting and with hindsight backtesting like this, it is very easy to pick out the hindsight examples. So that is also very important to understand, where you also want to sometimes go into, all right, we also have this, for example, right there, that example. And we also have other PDRAs that might not have held at that moment in time. So that's quite important to do as well, because if we have the same exact sharp turn, then there's not necessarily a difference, right? Where eventually, and why backtesting is not that effective as well, or hindsight backtesting is quite effective to train your eyes, but eventually it all needs to be done in live trading because conditions really vary in live trading, as in your thought process is a lot different as well. So on the 1-hour, let's dive into it again and let's look at those examples. Here we have a huge gap. That's a Sunday gap, so let's not count that. Here we have somewhat of an ST, but it was not a breakaway gap. All right, so it fills actually. So we are currently seeing that the ST constantly fills when they are not breakaway gaps. So then is when we would expect again, and when we would need that ST plus RE, like we always use on the 1-hour. So on the weekly and to the 1-hour then. So ST fills, short term fills, ST holds right there. Why does this ST hold eventually? Well, obviously it's the biggest one, but it's not necessarily a breakaway gap, right? We can also see that it's not necessarily a breakaway gap. So eventually just holds. All right, not the most interesting one, but eventually we do have this, another, not the first sharp turn, but we have again a sharp turn formation. It's a breakaway gap, and that does hold. So can we say that those fair value gaps are indeed potentially stronger? Well, let's look at some more examples. And let's see. Let's look at this 1-hour right here that had a rejection. Very ugly price action right here. Not the greatest price action. And let's see at the fair value gaps that did hold. The fair value gaps that eventually did end up holding right there, for example, this fair value gap, after we create this breakaway gap, we create another fair value gap, these did hold. So there could be some logic to it overall, where this one did not hold that fair value gap because it's not a breakaway gap. So the logic is potentially there. So this is how, and again, I'm currently not really writing down my thoughts right there because I'm mainly sharing them with you. But when you are doing this and you are creating case study, you're likely, well, likely, I say likely, and again, you're likely not talking to someone. So that is when you would write it down instead, because then you get those thoughts out there into the real world. That is very important. So this is how you go about case studies. Just simply looking at previous price action in hindsight. You don't need to backtest. Hindsight backtesting, yes, but live backtesting with the replay tool, no, you don't need to do that. So that is how you would go about certain topics as well. For example, order flow lags. Can you follow the order flow lags right there? Do you notice eventually certain things about order flow lags? Where, for example, this fails. Why does this fail? Well, that fails because it doesn't have a daily flag of higher. All right, I noticed that one time. Then eventually I can say, all right, if I notice that a couple of more times, then potentially there's a certain pattern that can be followed and that we can stick to. So that is exactly how you do want to create case studies as well. Just like it mentions, going into the chart and you have a case, you have a topic, and you're just studying it. Can I find examples of that? What are typical characteristics of this thing happening? And that is what you consistently do over and over and over. And that leads to eventually a great understanding on your side as well, because you're seeing it through your own eyes. That is very important. All right, perfect. Thank you.